I've redone the agenda a little bit. I got up to about 45 slides for today, and so I booted everything else to part 4. So today we'll spend a minute and talk a recap of what we talked about in part 2, and then we'll continue where we left off with which was implementing Notification Composer and going through the different setup and transactional pages, and then jump into AWE conversion processing and the change assistance steps that are included in a change package. All right, with that, so as a reminder, we started going through all the different setup pieces and people tools and enterprise components with Notification Composer. We covered the conversion process run control a little bit. We're going to dig in a lot more about that today. We went through defining a business process, defining a user list, and we were almost done with compose notification, which creates a new notification and allows customers to create a trigger using event mapping. So we're going to pick up where we left off there and then cover define notification events, and then circle back into people tools and jump into some more configuration and then my preferences. All right, so as a reminder, compose notification is really a guided process. It allows you to specify the different options. There's some preferences that allow you to kind of fine-tune what shows up in the guided process to remove more technical things that maybe you don't necessarily need to see or understand. So we got all the way through and we were almost there, but the last thing is the review and submit step. So we went through the general notification information steps, the define message content steps, and this is the very last one. So this page basically allows you, just like any guided process, to kind of go backwards. So maybe you see the summary here and like, oh no, I did this wrong. Let me go back. You can submit it, which would save it to the database. You have the ability to edit. You also have the ability to save as draft. So all my screenshots right now didn't really show the banner. So if you see in the upper right-hand corner, this is available throughout this guided process. Anytime, let's say that you're moving through these different steps and you just want to save it and come back to it later, you can save as draft. So that's available even from step 1. All right, so something that's a little odd that we're looking at is if a draft notification is saved, the only time it shows up is the next time you click on the add. So we're working on something to actually, show that there's drafts on the main page, then only when you add. But basically, let's say that I clicked on the add and it says, okay, well, here's some drafts. Do you want to resume? Do you want to discard this one? Do you want to return to the search? Do you want to skip drafts and maybe create a brand new one? It gives you a whole bunch of different options to do with the drafts that are saved. All right, well, now we're done with compose notification and move on to notification event. As a reminder, notification events are the events that occur within a PeopleSoft transaction that trigger a notification, like submitting an expense report, may trigger an approval notification to a manager. We being PeopleSoft, deliver notification events for all of our supported notifications. However, a customer may create their own event as well. So this page allows you to search for those events, add a new notification event, and of course, edit a notification event. And for those that are added by the customer, the delete option will be there as well. So it's not there for any PeopleSoft delivered notification events. When you add a notification event, it's a very straightforward page. It's basically the event, the description, and the ID. And just a reminder, the ID field is not translated. We tried to make that apparent by using words not separated by spaces. So, if you have an international customer and they start seeing English, we were afraid of that. So we tried our naming conventions to be, English words not separated by spaces. So it looked more like an identifier or code. And as a general rule, I've mentioned this a couple of times, we tried to keep the notification event and the notification ID that basically hooks the event up to compose notification that we just talked about and went over in detail in the last part, the same, so that there's no confusion. The notification ID is the link to compose notification, so very important. If you edit a notification event, that there are a few more things to understand. The edit provides the ability to, of course, review and edit the important details. The little information icon next to the notification ID shows you what was configured in compose notification. The information icon next to the PeopleTools notification name, of course, shows the information in PeopleTools, whether it's mandatory, whether in-app text or email are available, and whether it's on by default. And of course, there's more details that will show you more, like the authorization, whether users can personalize, etc. So if a PeopleSoft delivered notification is edited, there is one more thing to understand, and that's the notification override. So basically, this is the way this was architected is, in the past, customers always complained, hey, I have to customize to do anything to this. Like for trigger business events, I had to go into App Designer and, turn off the routing to email, or maybe I had to go and change the code to be able to send an in-app because the developer, the product team didn't deliver that capability. Maybe the message content is not what they want, or the recipient. So with this approach, everything is configurable. So this override basically allows a customer to use compose notification to create anything they want. Maybe they don't like the notification name that we delivered out of the box, or maybe they want to change the user list or the message content. They can compose a new notification and then come here and override it. And that basically, when this event is triggered, it will use the information that the customer overrode rather than the one that PeopleSoft delivers. So this is configuration based all the way around. There is no more coding that's necessary for things like this, which is really a great approach and one of the key benefits of Notification Composer. Now we're going to move on more to some of the PeopleTools settings that we really haven't talked about. So everything, I guess the very beginning, part 2, we did a few things like the application installation page, and then we did some of the global settings in PeopleTools. Well, we haven't spent much time on anything else in PeopleTools. Now we're going to drill into that a little bit more. So the notification settings page is really where you define the notification name. And as a reminder, in Enterprise Components and Notification Composer, we try to say PeopleTools notification name, so it's obvious that it's something in PeopleTools. So this page allows you to add a new one, save a notification name, and lets you perform a lot of different actions, like you can update, which they call configure, you can delete one, or you can add it to an ADS project if you want to move it between environments. All right, so let's dig in a little bit more. Let's say if you were adding a notification name, of course, the notification name field, we've talked about this multiple times, so I'm not going to go into that. The description of the notification name, the functional category, which is the logical grouping, like maybe a whole bunch of notification names related to benefits or payroll or expenses. This kind of groups notification names together for search purposes and for the customer or organization to kind of understand better everything that's related somehow. The object owner ID helps classify the product or feature where it rolls up to, and it really helps in some of the searches. So in PeopleTools, you can search by object owner ID. Internally, this is used to determine what languages the setup will be translated into. Okay, mandatory, this is the same thing as required. Not quite sure why the word mandatory was used by PeopleTools, but that's what we think of as required. So if something is mandatory, it means the recipient cannot turn off the notification completely in My Preferences. The setting, when this is set, it means that the recipient or the user has to at least select one delivery method, and sometimes PeopleTools calls this channel of communication, which is email, in-apps, or text. One of those have to be set if the notification name is set as mandatory. The available is really saying, hey, for this notification name and everything mapped to it, it says whether in-app, email, or text is available. If it's not available in the notification name, that means that it will never be sent via that delivery method. And the recipients can't personalize to change it if it's not available. So for example, if I only have in-app available, it means that email and text could never be selected by the recipient to receive this if they're able to personalize. They only have the ability to get an in-app. Enable by default, this is really to allow a default for a notification. So basically, if enable by default is yes, that means that that is the default for all the recipients to receive that notification, unless they have the ability to personalize and whether it is available. So allow personalization. This is another major benefit of moving to Notification Composer. With this approach now and everything going through notification name, not only do we get the additional delivery methods like in-app and text for every single notification, or the potential for that, it also allows the admin to determine whether the recipients can personalize. So basically, if they're able to personalize, then typically they can change certain things about the notification, like maybe they want a text if it's available versus an email, or for something that's critical. So in order to do that, the admin says who is authorized, and the authorization is by either role and or permission. So if the user has that role or permission, then they're able to personalize. All right, so moving on to my preferences. So in the notification preferences, there's actually two things related to notifications, and this is what threw us off internally in development, and customers have also questioned it as well, is that there's something notification related in general settings, and I've highlighted that. It's the phone number for text. This is the phone number where you as a user will receive text notifications if texting is allowed and you have actually given consent. This is really confusing because all the other preferences that are notifications related are actually in the notifications page. So just remember that there are two places that are notification related. One is if texting is used, which is general settings, and then everything else is in notifications. So in a future release, they're looking at consolidating this because we've complained about this multiple times. All right. So next up is on the notifications page in my preferences. So consent, if texting is allowed in the application, like in the global settings, the recipient will not receive any text, nor will they be able to select text as their delivery option until the user agrees to consent. Once they've actually agreed to consent, then they can revoke it. And also that they can also say, hey, well, maybe I've lost my phone, or it's in for repair, or I'm going to be out of the country for X number of days and I just want to suspend. So you have the ability to suspend text notifications as well. So next up is contact preferences. This is where the user selects the email and or phone number for notifications. So I'm going to go over email. That basically, let's say that I select choose, the choose button next to email addresses. This opens a modal where the available emails will be specified. So one thing to know about this is that the PeopleTools provides the ability to override the behavior. So for those familiar with HCM, we allow an employee or a person for lack of a better word, to actually say what their business email is, what their personal email is, et cetera, et cetera. That's where, usually that application maintains all the email addresses. So PeopleTools provides the ability to override the behavior to only allow certain types of emails and where those emails are stored. So for HCM, we've delivered an application class that allows the prompt or what's shown to go to personal data in HCM. And it also allows you to update the link. I mean, you'll see ones that says update email address. This allows the application to say, hey, if they click on update email addresses, take them to employee self-service in HCM. So it allows the integration between PeopleTools and an application pillar. Notification delivery. So this is the main thing that determines, which notifications the user can personalize. So one of the confusing things that customers typically ask about is like, hey, I've configured this notification name and it doesn't show up here. Well, the only things that show up here are notification names that have been set up that the user can personalize. So if I have authorization to personalize based on the role of permission, it will show up here. Let's say that I, as an admin, I set up approvals. I'm just going to throw that out there, like a certain type of approval, but I don't want users to personalize it. It will not show up here because the user can't personalize. This list is only the things that I can change, which is, because it's my preferences. If you don't have the ability to personalize, there's nothing you can set from a preference standpoint. So it would not show here unless you can personalize via the authorizations and the notification name. So I provided a couple of examples just to kind of help solidify this a little bit. So obviously all of these can be personalized by this particular user. So address change, marital status, and onboarding allow in-app and email, but not text. Email is enabled by default. So, and actually, so that's why you see that in-app is grayed out. Is not set. Text is not there for address change, marital status, or onboarding. However, banking has text available. So that's why and it's enabled by default. That's why it looks this way. And that's kind of what I'm trying to point out here is the way it looks based on the configuration. Also, onboarding is set as mandatory. So you'll see next to onboarding, there is a red star. And the legend of that is mandatory. Basically, select at least one notification option, which means they have to have at least in-app, email, or text based on what's available. They have to select one. They can't turn them all off. All right. So now we move on. We've gone through pretty much all of the setup. So now we're going to spend some time on the conversion so that everybody kind of understands what happens in the change package. So what is converted by Change Assistant? So basically steps exist in the change package, and we're going to go through those in detail in the next section. And basically what it does, no conversion is required, at least in the change package, for non-AWE related transactions, related notifications, but a conversion is necessary for AWE to make them Notification Composer ready. And as I said, we'll drill into these steps in the next section, but this is really just to describe what's happening. So what it does in the conversion process is prior to the conversion on the AWE setup and approval setup, basically, each event like on final denial, pushback, on process launch, on final approval, on escalate, etc. Whatever the customer configures, that there are checkboxes prior to the Notification Composer approach in the notification section for each event. In this example, for on final denial, email and push were actually selected. So basically that means that when the event on final denial is triggered by AWE, the requester, based on this setup, will get an email as well as a push notification. So this is prior to the notification composer conversion. Now, basically, with the new approach, what we do when notification composer is turned on the installation table, everything is controlled through the associated notification event. And of course, the notification event is tied to a notification ID, which is also tied to a PeopleTools notification name. So remember that with this approach, notification name is what controls what delivery methods are available and whether it can be personalized. So if I go back one more, before it was right in the configuration, right? They could choose email or push. Well, now all of this is really moved to the notification name setup. So the conversion basically is associating all these events like on final denial, pushback, etc., with a notification event, because that is tied to a notification name that dictates, hey, can this send an email? Can this send a text? Can this, send an in-app, which we used to call push? So that is what the conversion is actually doing, is making this notification composer ready, which basically means, changing the usage of the flags that I showed in the previous screenshot, basically to a notification event. So this is what the page looks like when notification composer is turned on. And as a reminder, let's just take this example a little bit further. On final denial, the notification event that got converted to was what you see here. And of course, this drills down and says, okay, well, this is the notification ID. Here's the PeopleTools notification name, and these are the things that are now available. So everything in the notification name setup dictates what happens for the on final denial, as an example, event in AWE. All right, so conversion options. So basically, there are only two options to understand. The first one is map to delivered AWE configuration, and this is the default, and preserve existing AWE configuration. If the organization wants to change the conversion option, which we'll talk about when we get into details about in the change package, really the online page is where they do that. They can change this radio button to say preserve existing AWE configuration. So let's drill into what those differences are. So before I do that, basically map to delivered AWE configuration. This is just a different way to say, hey, I want what PeopleSoft delivers. And with some exceptions, because maybe the customer has, added an AWE process or changed some of the events, etc. But basically, this is, hey, I want to take what PeopleSoft delivers and use that instead of what I configured or changed for their configuration. Preserve existing AWE configuration. That basically means, hey, I've already got this all set up and working, and I just want you to convert it to use notification composer exactly how I have it configured. So those are at a high level view, the differences between these two options. But let's dig in a little bit more. So the common question we always get asked, well, which one should I choose? I don't really know what the benefits of one versus the other are. So what we told customers at the Reconnect conference just recently about this was, if an organization plans to leverage texting or personalization notifications in the future, it's recommended to map to delivered AWE configuration. And the main reason is this option standardizes the delivery methods based on the type of recipient, organizes the notification according to business process and functional category, and really is a better starting point for leveraging and implementing a brand new notification strategy for an organization's users. So really, it's a better starting point because basically today, most customers have not implemented texting, haven't leveraged notification name in any way unless they're an FSCM customer. I think in the very first session, we said that FSCM has done a couple of rounds of using notification name, whereas HCM is not. So on the HCM side, they've never had the ability for personalization. So if they do preserve existing AWE configuration, then you're not going to be leveraging all the new benefits of Notification Composer. If the organization does not plan to implement text messaging in the future, does not plan for user personalized, then maybe they can just do preserve existing AWE configuration. It's going to keep everything exactly the same as what they have today in their environment. But that also means they're not going to be not really going to leverage without a lot of extra configuration to be able to use some of the new functionality that we've been talking about around personalization, configuration, etc. All right, so let's dig in a little bit more what's happening under the covers. So if map to delivered AWE configuration options chosen, all of the PeopleSoft delivered events like pushback, on final approval, deny, etc., will be assigned to PeopleSoft delivered notification events in Notification Composer. And of course, that means to PeopleTools notification names delivered by the application through that notification ID that's associated with the event. For example, if on final approval event had been configured to only the email delivery by the organization and the application delivers the on final approval as a in-app, the on final approval event after the conversion would be associated to a notification event and notification name that sends an in-app notification. So basically that's really what map to delivered means is I'm going to take what PeopleSoft delivers as a best practice. And if it is different than what I selected for that event, it will be changed basically to use what PeopleSoft delivers. So that's the key thing to understand about the differences between map to delivered and preserve. Okay, a little bit more. So there's a little nuance is that you still have the ability to map to delivered AWE configuration, even if you've added your own process IDs, even if you've added custom events. This is where customers may get a little confused, like, oh, well, I've added my own and that's not PeopleSoft delivered, so I shouldn't map to the delivered. That is not true. So basically, we handle those as an exception because we don't necessarily know what to do with them. We do some processing and look at what they have and convert it anyway to Notification Composer. So what happens in those instances is that a custom AWE process ID will be converted to placeholder business process. And the reason is we don't know what business process this is associated with. It's a custom process ID. It could be for their own custom transaction. So we can't say, what the business process is. So we set it to placeholder business process. Custom events. So let's say that, either events on a custom process ID or events that the customer added to one of our delivered process IDs. So what happens here is that for anything that is a custom event, we map it based on the checkboxes that are checked, like the email, in-app, etc., and choose a notification name that matches up with the delivery methods that they selected for that event. So there are 4 of them: approval email, which is approval email only. So maybe they only selected email and not the others. Email and in-app, like maybe in the setup for the event in AWE, they selected those 2 checkboxes, email and app. Maybe it was only in-app, or maybe they didn't have anything selected at all. So we map the event to one of these 4, depending on what their checkboxes are in that setup. Now let's move on to preserve. So preserve works a little bit like the custom configuration that I was talking about when they do map to delivered. So basically it does some of the same things. The only difference is that if they're using one of our delivered process IDs, we keep some of the information the same, like the business process, etc. However, the events are done exactly, like I mentioned, as well as like a custom process ID that maps to a placeholder business process. So it works very similar to what I talked about in the last option, and it uses one of the notification names based on their setup for that particular event and the checkboxes that were checked. All right, so now let's move on to Change Assistant. So we did things a little bit differently than we've done in the past, except for features like approvals, delegations. We handle those particular features where there is a D support involved. A little bit different in enterprise components where we're trying to push the customer along. So basically, what some customers have noticed is, hey, I took this feature and it turned Notification Composer on. And that's expected with this. So what happens when you select the feature is not only is the install flag turned on, the customer can turn it off, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but there are a couple of tasks that are added to the change package in Change Assistant for the conversion process that we just talked about. There are two tasks that are one at the top, which is pre-process requirements. Basically, what we do is we do a backup that I'll talk about in a second for some of the AWE before we start bringing in any of the delivered system data. There's also a task towards the end of the change package that actually runs the conversion that we just talked about. And that's added to the completing final application changes of the change package. All right, so task one, pre-processing. This is, like I said, at the very top, and this is really before any of the processing of data occurs in the change package, before we start running data mover scripts, before we start running conversion processes. It's done at the very beginning to actually preserve information. So what happens in this step in the task I just talked about is it backs up all of the AWE tables that you see here. So really, it's just a safeguard that, maybe the customer runs into a problem. So we want to make sure we preserve that before there are changes being made. And so basically, there'll be a DAT file that is, all this is exported into that, really the customer could re-import if they really wanted to restore everything. So really, all we provide is just the backup. We don't have a script for them to restore, but the data is there in a DAT file in their Change Assistant directory. All right, now let's talk about task two, running the Notification Composer conversion. This task actually has 4 steps. So the first step is to back up 2 of the AWE tables and all of the Notification Composer tables in case the customer wants to completely start over with a different conversion approach. So basically, this, just like I mentioned in the last task, for the AWE setup, this actually does a backup before the conversion is run for everything Notification Composer related. The next step basically is a manual stop. So basically, after the data mover runs to do the backup, we have a manual stop. And basically, it says, in this step, you can review the notification conversion process. And just a note, in our next image, we're actually changing the wording here a little bit to include a lot more detail. I think if I go backwards, everything you see here on the task. So basically, if you don't know this, you're not familiar with Change Assistant, when you select a task or a step, on the right-hand side, usually it gives you a whole bunch of text that describes that particular task or step. So that's what these boxes of information are showing, is the text that shows up in Change Assistant. So a lot of this is going to be also in that step I was just talking about, because we got feedback from customers. It's like, oh, well, this didn't really tell me anything. Although we say, hey, go to this document, it's a whole bunch of information. And basically, we want to repeat what we had in the task level here going forward, so the customer knows what they can do and understands it better without having to dig through this document. But anyway, the whole point of this is, hey, I'm about to convert your data. You need to go and look at the conversion options to figure out which one you want to use. And those are the conversion options we just got through talking about. So when the customer has completed the review and decided, how they want to convert the data, whether it's mapped to existing or preserve, map to PeopleSoft delivered or preserve existing, they mark the step as complete and then continue the execution of the change package. The next step is where all the magic happens. And this is where we run an App Engine program to actually do the conversion that we just talked about, where it looks at, whether looks at the conversion option and figures out, okay, well, what do I need to do here? And then actually sets the events to the notification event or generates one depending on their conversion option. This is where all the magic happens. I thought I would point out the most important thing from a troubleshooting perspective is to make sure you look at the log. That will be the first thing that development will ask you for. It's like, okay, if the customer says, oh, well, this didn't happen, that didn't happen, I'm not sure what happened with this. This log is what we will be asking for. It actually includes, which conversion option was selected, and then it actually indicates some detail about what happened in the conversion. If it generated mappings to a notification name or a notification event, what have you, a lot of that can be found in the log. So from a support perspective, I thought it was important to also say, okay, well, how do I get that log from the customer? So there's two different ways. The log can be viewed by right-clicking on the step and selecting View Log. Another one is basically you have to ask the customer to go look at your change assistant settings to see where the output directory is, and that log file can be found in the directory path for the change package based on what's set up in the update manager options. All right, so I thought I'd give another example in the log and something very important to understand. If you have a customer that says, hey, nothing happened, I went in and nothing's converted. So you definitely want to go look at the log and see if the notification composer flag is turned off. If that flag is turned off, we do nothing in the conversion step at all. And that log will tell you that. So that would be another thing that will help you in troubleshooting the conversion. The last step after the conversion runs is an export of everything. And we use this as input into subsequent passes, additional passes, as well as the move to production pass in Change Assistant.